Hi, this is Mark Hamill, a graduate student of philosophy at Holy Apostles College and Seminary. This brief multimedia presentation is a semester project, the subject of which is a survey of the Gettier challenge and its impact on epistemic thought. During the presentation, I will introduce the notion of knowledge and traditional justified true belief, or JTB, analysis of knowledge, then touch upon Edmund Gettier cases, and the implications for JTB and other epistemological thought. Move to the two basic responses to Gettier, which are either 1, rehabilitating JTB, or 2, efforts to dismiss or dissolve the Gettier challenge altogether. Finally, I'll summarize what we've covered and offer some thoughts on what Gettier has wrought. The first question, which kind of makes sense, is what constitutes knowledge? And here we're talking about propositional knowledge, and we'll contrast that with other types of knowledge. For example, there's procedural knowledge, also known as know-how or competence, such as how to record a video and post it on YouTube, and we'll see how that goes. Another kind of knowledge is that of acquaintance knowledge or familiarity, like I may know my hometown. Epistemologists' primary focus, however, is on propositional knowledge, and that is the epistemological scope, if you will, for this brief video. So what is propositional knowledge? Well, it relates to propositions. Think declarative sentences that describe a fact or state of affairs. So if we look at this first bullet point, here we have one. Knowledge that P, where P equals some indicative sentence, such as snails are invertebrates. So let's walk through the traditional analysis of knowledge using the snail example. First, however, let me briefly go through that. So JTB, as we talked about before, is the traditional threefold analysis to determine if a subject S has knowledge that P, and P, as we stated above, our example is snails are invertebrates. And here we have three components. One is belief. We want to know that, be sure that the subject S believes that P. And we have truth, where S is belief that P needs to be true. And then we've got justification, which we're going to see is a big part of our conversation. So here justification is S's belief that P needs to be warranted based on sufficient evidence or reasoning. So when all those three elements are together, we can see, based upon the Venn diagram or Euler diagram on the right, where knowledge intersects. So if we go through the snail example, here the subject S is Bob. It would seem contradictory if we claim that Bob knows that snails are invertebrates if he does not believe this very proposition. Secondly, it would be contradictory if indeed snails were really not invertebrates and Bob was wrong, even if he really believes it. And thirdly, if Bob simply guessed correctly that snails are invertebrates, meaning he might have slept through his high school biology class, which presumably would have given him some reasonably good justification, we can't say that he really has knowledge, even if he has true belief. It is instead unjustified true belief. So when we think about JTB, it appears like it's pretty robust. Well, then came this American philosopher named Edmund Gettier. And in 1963, Gettier published a 1.5-page paper, very short, entitled Is Justified True Belief Knowledge? It essentially turned the world of epistemology on its ear, prompting considerable thought on the sufficiency of JTB. In other words, are J, T, and B individually necessary and jointly sufficient for knowledge? He started his paper by stating that various attempts have been made in recent years to state necessary and sufficient condition for someone's knowing a given proposition. Gettier then characterized the JTB conditions, or JTB conditions, held by three different philosophers, and we're going to review that momentarily. He stated that he will argue that all three JTB condition sets do not constitute a sufficient condition of the proposition that S knows that P. He notes two key points regarding justification and deduction, and then proceeds to his two cases, after which he states that the cases show what he previously asserted. So, as I mentioned, we'll see that in a bit, but it's this may be a silly picture, but as you look at it, Gettier in many ways pushed the JTB Humpty Dumpty off the wall, who had a great fall, for sure. Meanwhile, we can certainly note that Gettier in his 1.5-page paper really didn't mention or have a proposal how to undo what perhaps he had done. And as you can see, Humpty there has got a thought bubble that says, "I've been Gettiered," which is a not uncommon term for being confounded by the Gettier problem. So who did Gettier implicate? Who are the JTB proponents, if you will? And we can go all the way back to one ancient philosopher, Plato, and two modern ones, Chisholm and Eyre. So we can read perhaps the quote for Plato, and this really was a summary from Theaetetus 201. Knowledge equals true belief with an account of the reason why the belief is true. So that is Plato. We can go to Eyre. The necessary and sufficient conditions for knowing that something is the case are first that one is said to know to be true, or said to know be true. Secondly, that one be sure of it. And thirdly, that one should have the right to be sure. And as we look below, we can see Gettier's characterization of each philosopher's JTB-oriented conditions. Now, Gettier's paper that we had mentioned, his Justified True Belief Knowledge, had two cases, both of which star a certain Smith and a certain Jones, with Smith serving as the epistemic agent, S, and we'll go through that momentarily. But each of these cases, and again, he has only two, have some features. And one is they contain a true and well-justified belief without being generally regarded as knowledge. And they have fallibility, which is the justification is fallible, which is not unexpected, given that the agents are human. And with that fallibility leaves a possibility that the belief is false. And then there's also this kind of strange luck, strange circumstances within the case, which make the otherwise well but fallibly justified belief in question fortuitously true. The philosopher Linda Zagzebski, easy for me to say, assesses the typical Gettier case situation as such. Since justification does not guarantee truth, it is possible for there to be a break in the connection between justification and truth. But for the connection to be regained by chance, and this is where the luck comes in. And remember that as we kind of breeze through the first Smith and Jones case. Another thing to note is that other philosophers after Gettier came up with their own types of Gettier cases, and there's a few here that are fairly famous. We got the sheep in the field, the pyromaniac, and the fake Barnes. So here's case one from Gettier's paper. We've got kind of the setup here. Suppose that Smith and Jones, and you can see them in the bottom right, have applied for a certain job. And suppose that Smith, he's our epistemic agent, S equals Smith. Suppose that Smith has strong evidence for the following conjunctive proposition. Jones is the man who will get the job, and Jones has 10 coins in his pocket. Smith's evidence for D might be that the president of the company president, you can see him in the upper center, assured him that Jones would in the end be selected, and that he, Smith, had counted the coins in Jones' pockets 10 minutes ago. So proposition D entails E, the man who will get the job has 10 coins in his pocket. And that essentially ends up being P, the proposition. Let us suppose that Smith sees the entailment from D to E and accepts E on the grounds of D, for which he has strong evidence. In this case, Smith is clearly justified in believing that E is true. So we continue as we look at what is captured in the red box in the bottom. bottom left. But imagine further that unknown to Smith, he himself, not Jones, will get the job. Hence, Smith is smiling. And also unknown to Smith, he himself has 10 coins in his pocket. Proposition E is then true, though proposition D, from which Smith inferred E, is false, in that Jones is the man who will get the job. We know that's false. Jones did have 10 coins in his pocket, by the way. Okay, so he himself has 10 coins. Proposition E is then true, though proposition D, from which Smith inferred E, is false. In our example, then, all the following are true. E is true. Smith believes that E is true, and Smith is justified in believing that E is true. But it is equally clear that Smith does not know that E is true, for E is true in virtue of the number of coins in Smith's pocket, while Smith does not know how many coins are in Smith's pocket, and bases his belief in E on account of the coins in Jones' pocket, whom he falsely believes to be the man who will get the job. So here, basically, we're saying, not so fast. P is true. S believes P to be true. S is justified in believing P is true. But S does not know that P is true because his belief is based on Jones's coin quantity, whom S falsely believes is the man who will get the job. So what does this all mean? Intuitively, epistemologists can discern that while the Gettier case reflects justified true belief conditions, they don't demonstrate knowledge. There's basically three options here. We've got JTB equals knowledge, meaning basically that the problem raised by Gettier was actually not a problem because of some sort of fatal defect within his cases and implicit argument. In other words, J and T and B are individually necessary and jointly sufficient. Thank you very much. We're good. Or 2, JTB sometimes is, but not always, sufficient for knowledge. That's what we have in the center there. And 3, or I should say, or 3, JTB is never sufficient for knowledge. These last two options, no surprise, is where much of the epistemological effort has been expended over the last 56 years or so since Gettier's paper. So what's the reaction? Many people just try to avoid being, as they say, Gettiered. There's two, and we can, as we just talked about those last two options, there's probably two very loose confederacies. We've got one side that seeks to rehabilitate JTB, and those who seek to dismiss or dissolve the Gettier challenge altogether. So as we look at that on the rehab, attempt to solve and thus surmount the challenge. Perhaps there's a fourth missing criteria. It's J plus T plus B plus something else. And then the other is dissolve it. So how do I deny the validity or grounds of the challenge and thus neutralize it? So while the post-Gettier article of reflection has been remarkable, it has prompted Richard Creeth to lament, in light of what he saw as the numerous attempts and failures to surmount the Gettier problem, that the cumulative effect of this is to make epistemology replace economics as the dismal science. Perhaps the following brief review of some of the JTB rehab proposals and Gettier challenge dissolution proposals will support that concern. So as we look to the rehabilitating JTB, we can see that there's a handful of proposals here. I'm not going to go through every single one, but for example, infallibility. So the infallibist justificatory support is necessary for sufficient belief. So here the problem is, and certainly one of the kings of skepticism is Descartes. This is where we tend. In real life, the subject rarely has infallible justificatory support for a belief, much like Smith did in his case. Another one is eliminate luck. And the evidence for the situation must be free of luck or accident to assist in the truth of P. But how much truth is enough? And luck is too much, and how much is just enough? This tends to vagueness, and certainly there's fallibilism in there as well. No false evidence. Certainly in this situation, we did have some false evidence, and that false evidence, for example, in the case, was the president of the company who told Smith that Jones was going to get the job. So as we go through, you can see in the red there's a tendency to vagueness, or difficulty, or skepticism. And with that, we have a picture of Descartes there. We've got our skepticism, or we've got that vagueness. So, for example, the, no luck or not too much luck. Well, how much luck is too much? How much luck is sort of okay, and how much luck, obviously, would be very little, would be great to support one or more of those proposals. If we look at the skepticism side, there's really only, the only ways to avoid a Gettier problem while retaining justified true belief is, one, maintain no degree of independence at all between the truth and justification. So basically, justification equals truth. And then the second one, which is not really a skeptical response, is create a near total independency between the justification condition and truth condition. For example, Hegel's metaphysical theory. Neither one of those is really practical or attractive. The first, brings us back to skepticism, obviously, and would really paralyze the cognitive path to getting to truth in the real world. We seek in the world to be in the best position for getting the truth. This is a path that usually gets us successfully to truth, but obviously there's no guarantees. And the second option there is, well, frankly, it's a bit crazy, and we should dismiss that. As we consider the dissolution, or how to dissolve the Gettier challenge, here are some proposals. We've got competing intuitions. So here, we talked about the intuition of epistemologists, knowing as they looked at the Gettier case or cases to say, hey, that's really not truth, or that's really not knowledge, I should say. But some folks are questioning, and not a lot necessarily, but have questioned whether or not the intuition of epistemologists is really representative of what real people have. And based upon some of their, surveys, and with that evidence, and some of this is based upon cultural differences, they may look at those cases and say, yeah, that is knowledge. I don't see a problem with that. Of course, there's difficulties with that, in terms of how do you assess which competing intuition is best, and who should be relied upon, therefore, and so on and so forth. And then we've got a proposal, knowing luckily. So the agent can luckily achieve JTB. That's interesting. In the case of Mr. Smith, is that he came close to definitely lacking knowledge, but definitely coming close does not mean that he indeed lacked knowledge. And in the first Smith case, aided by luck, he had JTB and thus knowledge. And if we think about it from a problematic standpoint, beyond what I just said there, a normal and rare way to secure knowledge, meaning luck. And it seems not to appeal to intuition, quite frankly. And then we have knowledge first, where the philosopher Timothy Williamson believes that knowledge entails JTB, but in a sense it's irreducible, and that knowledge is primitive and is the most general factive mental state, with other factive mental states being specific ways of knowledge. For example, seeing equals knowledge, remembering equals knowledge. And essentially what he's saying is knowledge is unanalyzable and can't be distilled into constituent parts. So that might be a little bit difficult to wrap our heads around, especially if we're coming from a JTB perspective. So what have we covered briefly here? I first introduced the notion of knowledge and the traditional justified true belief analysis of knowledge. We touched upon Edmund Gettier case or cases, and the implication for JTB and epistemological thought, which led to a quick review of two basic responses to Gettier, either one, rehabilitating JTB, or two, efforts to dismiss or dissolve the Gettier challenge altogether. Finally, we reflected on the very proposals that have emerged since Gettier's 1963 paper, and perhaps like me, I think the epistemological conversation will and needs to continue. But with that, I'd like to leave you with a quote from Linda Zebzewski's article. Clearly, she's a JTB proponent, but I think what she says makes a lot of sense. Almost every contemporary theory of justification or warrant aims only to give the conditions for putting the believer in the best position for getting the truth. The best position is assumed to be very good, but imperfect, for such is life. Properly functioning faculties need not be working perfectly, but only well enough. Reliable belief-producing mechanisms need not be perfectly reliable, only reliable enough. Evidence for a belief need not support it conclusively, but only well enough, and so on. As long as truth is never assured by the conditions which make the state justified, there will be situations in which a false belief is justified. With this almost universal assumption, Gettier cases will never go away. Thank you.